Hi everyone, good evening. I hope you all had a good spring break. Welcome back to Food Literacy. I'm going to start off with a couple quick course announcements. So these are only for the students who are enrolled in the class. But as you know, if you're a student, we released the grades for essay number 1 today. We've received a couple of questions, and I just wanted to address some of the issues in the emails that we've received and some of the feedback from the GSIs, which will hopefully help you as you move forward and write the next essay. As a whole, students did well on the first essay. There were a couple things that the GSIs noticed when they were grading that they've asked me to address. So one of the things that some students lost points for is if they tried to focus on more than one lecture for their essay. The essays are short, they're only 1 to 2 pages, and it's best if you focus on one of the lectures and then you can really go in depth in the material that was covered by the speaker. One of the aspects of the rubric was answering the questions in the prompt. So there were 4 questions, and you got full credit if you answered the 4 questions. It's best to answer the questions explicitly as much as you can, because we know some students alluded to answering some of the questions, but didn't address them specifically. So just keeping in mind for essay 2, the prompt is the same, the questions are the same. Make sure you answer each of the questions to get full credit. The paper is meant to be a reflection of what you've learned after coming to the lecture and reading the materials. The paper is not a summary of what the speaker had discussed. So we want you to think more deeply about how this topic connects to food literacy, to food access issues, and to the questions that we addressed. The GSIs do care about formatting as is laid out in the rubric, so we are paying attention to whether your essay is the appropriate length, whether you use single-spaced or something else. In the future, please make sure that you look at all points of the rubric. Actually, in essays 2 and 3, the rubric has been updated to be even more specific as to what we're looking for a really nice essay. If you have any questions about essay number 1, please look through the rubric, look at the comments that the GSIs already gave you on the assignment before you ask your question. Then, if you still have questions, ask the GSI who graded your assignment. We will consider regrades if there was an error that was made on your grading, but in general, know that the GSIs work together to follow the rubric that we've created and posted, and that there's consistency across both of the graders. Also, we know that there has been a lot of discussion at the university level around the novel coronavirus and what's going to happen. The teaching team is also in discussions for this class about what will happen if and when the university decides to cancel all in-person classes. Know that our speakers are still scheduled, and so we will find a way to get you their lectures, whether it be remote or online, if we cannot somehow hold class in this room. Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lily for our other course announcements.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy asked me to pick up the energy after her announcement about the essays, so we'll try, and I think Leah will really pick it up. So a couple class announcements. As always, welcome if this is your first time at Food Literacy for All. This class is free and open to the public. We just ask that you please RSVP. Thanks to our team at Michigan Media, all of our classes are filmed and available on YouTube. You can tweet the class quotes, photos at Food Literacy for All. Contact our friend Kabibi at the Detroit Food Policy Council if you're looking for a ride between class and Detroit. Tonight also, hello, we're live streaming to Michigan State University. There's a group gathered in East Lansing, so thanks for joining us, and they'll be able to ask questions during the Q&A as well. Okay, the deadline is almost coming up. Just a quick reminder, the UM Sustainable Food Program is still accepting applications. And also, the deadline is extended to apply for the coolest internship. Right, Mama Jerry? That's right. So please, we'll take applications until March 20th. So please send in your resume and cover letter if you want to intern in Detroit this summer at D-Town Farm. Is Malik here? Malik, D-Town Farm or Oakland Avenue Farm? All right, an event you might be interested in on Friday the 13th. This Earth Day event is with some of our SFSI affiliates, all about healthy and sustainable food. You might want to check it out. Another upcoming event to put on mark your calendar, free and open to the public. On March 30th, we're bringing in a guest speaker who studies food sovereignty in Brazil, Hannah Whitman. Okay, thank you so much to our sponsors. This class wouldn't be possible without them. And I'm going to do a quick clicker question for you all. Get out your clickers. And then Mama Jerry is going to introduce Leah. Okay, what do you think? You guys have been getting better over the semester. Which of the following is not true about our guest speaker tonight, Leah Penniman? She promotes tasting the soil to check its pH. She taught high school English for 17 years. Her most cherished farm tool is a hoe. Or D, she received the James Beard Leadership Award. What do you all think? Which is not true? Okay, you're not sure. But you don't think she tastes the soil. And you don't think she's into using hoes. You're wrong. She's into all of that. Is that right, Leah? She's into all of that. She did teach for 17 years. She taught biology. So the correct answer is B. All right. Mama Jerry's going to introduce our speaker tonight.
All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. Y'all too quiet. Thank you. So it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Leah Penniman, who is a farmer. We know she's an educator, she's an activist, and she's a badass woman. We're celebrating Women's History Month this month, badass woman. Leah was raised in Massachusetts and began farming as a teenager. Leah has worked in food projects nationally and internationally and is an author of Farming While Black. I read that. Most recently, it's a most recent published book for her. Leah also co-founded the Soul Food Farm in 2011, whose mission is to end racism and injustice in the food system. And so I am excited to hear her speak today. It's my first time actually hearing you speak. Much love as well. And so I ask you to help me welcome her. Thank you.
Peace, everyone. Thank you so much. How's volume? Are we good? We ready to go? As I throw stuff on the floor. Does anyone in this room eat food? Okay, awesome. Does anyone in this room live on land, like on planet Earth? Perfect. You are definitely in the right place. We all have that in common, and I believe that because we all eat food, because we all live on the land, we all should really care very deeply about justice in the food system because it impacts us. And I'm super excited to talk to you today about the work of Soulfire Farm, why being a farmer is basically the coolest thing that you can do in this lifetime, right? And what we can do to make the food system great for everyone. So to start out, I want to give an opportunity for us to give thanks to our ancestors. And there's one particular ancestor that I want to call into this room right now. Her name is Susie Boyd. She's my grandma's grandma's grandma. And she and many other women, when they were living in the Dahomey region of West Africa, they were watching their cousins getting kidnapped, their aunties, their uncles, their babies, and into these ships from which there was no report back. They did an insurance policy. And their insurance policy was to gather up their okra, millet, cowpea, black rice, a goose melon, all their seeds that they've been saving for generations and braid them into their hair, right? Believing against odds in a future on soil and believing that we, their descendants, would exist to inherit that seed. Right? And I know we're facing a lot in these times, and it's hard times, but I have to remember that if Susie Boyd could face that and still have the courage and audacity of hope to get a seed in her braid, like, who am I to give up on my descendants? Who am I to say, we can't make a difference? And so I invite you in this moment to think of an ancestor that had foresight for you. Think of their name. And at the count of 3, we're going to call their name into the room loud and strong. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Ashe, Ashe. I also want to give thanks and pay homage to the area as well as the Anishinaabe, people who are the original and rightful stewards of this land, and to the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican, who are the rightful stewards of the land where I farm. Even though my ancestors were forced here involuntarily, we still enjoy settler privilege because we're not Mohican and we're on territory where people were displaced and forced by genocide. And to me, it's very, very important that we all think about and also act in solidarity with original peoples. And that's going to depend on what those folks need. Like right now, the Mohican people are trying to stop a pipeline that's going through their ancestral burial grounds. They're trying to save some seeds that are at risk of being lost. And so we at Soulfire Farm are working in collaboration, right, on those projects with Mohican leadership. And I invite folks who are not already involved in Native solidarity and Native sovereignty work to see what ways that you can lean into it. And the third thanks I want to give is to my, because if you notice, there's absolutely no chicken coop clothes, right? And a smidge. And usually that's, and the only reason that I have clean clothes on right now and I get to like talk about farming with y'all far from home is because Justin and Jonah and Larissa are holding it down. And you know, Martin Luther King was not the civil rights movement, right? Vandana Shiva is not ecofeminism. It always takes a team, right? It always takes a whole bunch of people together to make change. And so I want to give thanks for my team and also for everyone who's making sacrifices so you can be in this room today. Cool. Could someone read this quote? Who's got a loud voice? Go ahead.
A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Marcus Garvey.
Ashe, right? Baba Malik just came in the room. He's my mentor. Can we give him a round of applause? Hey, Baba Malik. So we're going to talk a lot about history right now because I'm going to put forth that the food system is not actually broken. It's actually working exactly as it was designed. And it was designed to concentrate wealth and resources in the hands of a few people at the expense of most of us. Our great-great-great-great-grandmothers didn't just braid seeds into their hair. They braided a whole lot of wisdom, a whole lot of knowledge, right? A lot of the things that we think about as sustainable agriculture, cooperative economies, right livelihood, those are Afro-Indigenous ways of knowing. Raised beds, right? Give thanks to the Ovambo people of Namibia. Composting and vermicomposting. Give thanks to Cleopatra of Egypt, right? Who actually put out a decree that said if anyone kills an earthworm, they will be put to death. That's what she said in 50 BCE. Now, mind you, I am not into capital punishment at all, right? At all. But she recognized the importance of the earthworm for the fertility and the sustenance of her people. So if you go take a soil core all the way down, right, you will see that the worm castings during her reign are 10 times higher than before or after. The USDA did that in 1949, right? You want to talk about rotational grazing. You want to talk about sustainable rice production. We give thanks to the Mende and the Wolof people. You want to talk about terracing. We give thanks to the Fanyaju of what is now Kenya, of preventing erosion on the hillsides. Credit unions came from the women's susus, the cooperative lending societies. Our idea of mutual labor comes from the Dokpwe and Dahomey. It wasn't just seeds, y'all. It was basically all the rich, beautiful wisdom that we have about what it is to live on this earth and feed our communities without destroying the earth in those communities, right? But what happens when our folks get here? There's a whole other situation going on, right? Anyone recognize this picture? What is it? What's the concept? Manifest destiny, right? This is the erroneous idea that white Europeans have the God-given right to colonize the continent from sea to shining sea. And this idea was invented around 1455 by Pope Nicholas in the Catholic Church, who put out what's called the Doctrine of Discovery. It said that white Christian nations had the obligation to go forth, enslave, colonize, and pillage non-Christian, non-white nations, which became the beginning of the Age of Discovery, the Nina the Pinta, the Santa Maria, Columbus sailed the ocean, all that, right? That was sanctioned by the church with the idea, right, that white Christians would bring the lights of Jesus to the savages. This concept of the Doctrine of Discovery became the basis for U.S. property law. In 1823, the Supreme Court, in the McIntosh decision, which was nicknamed the Finders Keepers Law, upheld the idea that indigenous people actually were not sovereign, but rather domestic dependents. And as soon as a European put down a flag, that land became part of the colony. The Supreme Court upheld the doctrine of discovery many, many more times, most recently in 2005, when the Oneida Nation in my home state of New York sued the county for some of its unceded territory, and Justice Bader Ginsburg handed down the majority decree that under the doctrine of discovery, the Oneida Nation was not sovereign and did not have any right to its territories. This is not over. The entire food system is based in stolen land, and it's also based in exploited labor. Right? We know that 12.5 million black people survived the journey across the Atlantic. At least 2 million souls rest in the bottom of the sea. And people weren't like snatched up because of strong backs and big biceps. Right? What's the climate like in Northern Europe? Cold. What's the climate like in Cuba, Brazil, Georgia, Florida? Who knows how to farm that? Us. They literally went community by community and kidnapped the very best farmers, right? They took the Wolof and the Mende and brought them to North and South Carolina because they were rice farmers and they needed rice growers. Look at the work of Judith Carney, the anthropologist who wrote Black Rice, for more history about this. But it's important to recognize that the $10+ trillion agricultural industry was built on the back of the unpaid labor of agricultural experts from Africa. The idea of building a food system on exploited labor and stolen land did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation, because there was a cute little exception in the 13th Amendment. Anyone know what it is? No slavery except what? If you've been convicted of a crime. So suddenly, 1865 rolls around, there's a bunch of new laws on the books. Black people may not loiter. What's loitering? Standing around, y'all bunch of loiterers, up to nothing, right? Vagrancy. Black people can't be vagrants. What's that mean? Not having a job. Specifically, not having a year-long contract on a farm. Not being upright and honest became a crime, the punishment for which was to have your children taken away and apprenticed to their former masters to learn morality. It was the beginning of the state taking away people's children, right? And you look at what young black men and women are picked up for these days: truancy, vagrancy, loitering, right? Very, very similar. It started in the late 1860s, and the prisons filled with black people who were then leased through convict leasing back to the plantation, to the mines, and to the railroads. This was not a footnote on history. 73% of Alabama's state budget in the late 1860s came from leasing African Americans back to plantations to do unpaid labor, right? And the people who were not convict leasees were sharecroppers. Sharecropping is a debt peonage system where, the former master owns the mule and the seed and the house and your clothes and the land and your everything. And then you pay for all of that in a share of the cotton. But most sharecroppers ended up more poor at the end of the season and owing cotton at the end than they did at the beginning, even working those 80-hour weeks. And you can't leave contract, you go to jail. Fannie Lou Hamer, among many brilliant things, when she was a child, she grew up as a sharecropper. And she noticed one day, this is an elementary school age child, right? She noticed one day that the plantation owner was doing something funny with the scales, so that every time you went to weigh your cotton, it seemed like less than it really was. So she went in the middle of the night and fixed it. She said, "That's the day I became an activist." The thing that amazes me, though, about resilience of our people is that despite sharecropping and convict leasing and slavery and the black codes, all this stuff, black folks always, just like any people, want land security. We want to be able to have our own homes. In fact, when the Union Army met with black clergy right at the end of the Civil War, they asked, what do y'all need? And they said, and I quote, "We need homes and the ground beneath them so we can plant fruit trees and say to our children, these are yours." Right? The yearning for land led people to save up money for 2 generations to purchase 16 million acres of tiny little parcels in the swamps and the hillsides. Right? There was no handout. 40 acres and a mule didn't happen, but people purchased 14% of the nation's farms, right, as a black community. Now, as you can imagine from this picture, the backlash was swift and severe. Because if everyone's getting off the plantation, you know that plantation owner isn't trying to do the work. And so they have trouble. The White Caps, the Ku Klux Klan, the White Citizens Council, they went for the independent black farmer. They burned down their houses. They strung people up. They shot at people. They murdered over 4,500 folks whose names we know. Right? And a lot of people think that the Great Migration, when 6 million African Americans went north, was just a search for opportunity in the factories during World War I. Friends, it was a refugee crisis. If after 2 generations you saved up enough money to get 2.5 acres, and then they came and across 6 million people fled for their lives. But again, there's a labor vacuum, and this would be an opportunity for the United States to say, you know, that whole stolen labor, stolen land thing, that's not cute anymore. Maybe we should rethink the food system. But instead, the United States starts thinking, well, who else can we exploit next? Picture represents? Bracero program, guest worker program. It was the Chinese workers, then the Filipino workers, right? Then after the Chinese Exclusion Act, we have Mexican workers, Caribbean workers coming through Bracero and then the H2 and then the H2A program. And I'll tell you a story to illustrate what's insidious about this particular reliance on labor in the way we do it in this country. So a friend of mine at an unnamed university in this general area, actually in the Midwest, teaches a class for future farmers, people who are going to their state land-grant university, excited about being farmers. And this professor said to his class, you know, how much would you need to be paid to work at the meat packing plant in town? I'll ask you the same question. If you would work at a meat packing plant for $15 an hour, would you please raise your hand? Okay. 20. 30. 45. Y'all got some trust funds in here. 45. I don't make $45 an hour. I don't make $15 an hour. So, but you're in good company because 100% of students who want to be, you said there is no way I would work at that meatpacking plant for any amount of money. It's dangerous. It's disgusting. Smell out of the creases of your skin, right? You can't get the smell out of your. Yeah. You can't get the smell out of your hair. You can't. You're likely to get repetitive stress injuries, right? You're likely to lose a limb. And so they said, there's no amount of money. Oh, and by the way, they added, that's Mexican work. So we can shake our heads, right? Like, but let's think for a second, right? Our country has figured out that the only way we can get people to actually feed us is if we create onerous trade agreements, war, and climate chaos all around the world so that indigenous people who love their families as much as you love your family and who own their land just as much as you would yearn to own your own land will cross over a hostile border into an unwelcoming territory to do dangerous, disgusting, backbreaking work far from home for less than minimum wage, and we won't even do it for $45 an hour. And that's how 85% of the labor is done in this country. And we all buy that food? Right? So it's not an interpersonal issue, right? It's a systemic issue, and it's baked into our laws. In the 1930s, when we finally got some labor laws up in here, we're talking about the original New Deal, not the Green New Deal, right? The original New Deal, Social Security, the 8-hour workday, the 40-hour work week, the overtime pay, the right to associate and collectively bargain and form unions. This was highly progressive legislation. And to FDR's credit, originally it was going to include everybody. But, you know, the Southern Democrats, they were not going to vote for this if it benefited people of color. And you can read those committee reports, and they said the N-word and everything right in there. I will not vote for that. So they put some exclusions in those laws. Farm workers and domestic workers, who were, go figure, black and brown people. And they haven't updated that. The Fair Labor Standards Act, the National Labor Relations Act, still don't include farm workers. If you're a farm worker
and you work on a small farm with less than 7 employees, there's no federal minimum wage. No right to unionize. No right to a day off in 7. 2020, y'all. Hasn't changed. So, of course, not everybody left the South. A lot of our folks stayed and fought. But unfortunately, the one agency that should have been on their side turned out to be their enemy number one. Anyone know what the USDA stands for? I mean, like, you better. You're in this class, right? The U.S. Department of Agriculture, their job is to make the food system work. They are supposed to give farmers loans, crop allotments, crop assistance, technical assistance. That's their job. But the county level is where you get that stuff. You got to go to the county, you got to apply. And if there's a racist county, you're going to have racist outcomes. And that's what was happening for generations. Black farmers would go during a drought to get a loan to put in irrigation. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. Did I see you down there trying to register to vote? Can't seem to find any application papers for you, right? And Pete Daniel wrote about this in the book Dispossession. Time and again, black farmers turned away. Their farms end up foreclosing. Went from 14% of the nation's farms down to 1% of the nation's farms. The U.S. Commission of Civil Rights in their 1962 and 1982 reports said that the USDA was the #1 cause of the decline of the black farmer. To the credit of my elders, they decided to sue the government. They actually won the largest civil rights settlement in the history of this country in 1999 in the Pigford v. Glickman case. But unfortunately, by that time, most of the plaintiffs were in their 80s and 90s. They'd already lost their farms. And when you divided up the settlement, everyone got $50,000. If anyone's tried to farm, you know you can't even get your tractor back for that much, never mind your land. But it was an important symbolic victory because it showed the world that black farmers didn't decline because they didn't know how to farm or didn't want to farm, but it was because of all these forces aligned against them. So let's follow folks up north, right? Anyone ever heard of Zillow before? Anyone ever look on Zillow? So I'm going to tell you a little story, and you tell me why my jaw dropped all the way down to my chest. So I was looking on Zillow because I wanted to make a map of the neighborhoods where we deliver the food that we grow on our farm. And I put in the zip codes of these different neighborhoods, and they were all outlined in red on Zillow. Why did my jaw drop all the way down to my chest? Redlining. Redlining, which is supposed to be illegal since 1977, is the policy that the federal government helped create, again in the 1930s, golden era, where they had maps commissioned that ranked neighborhoods from most desirable to lend down to least desirable to lend, and black neighborhoods were outlined in red, and banks were told do not give mortgages within those red outlines. At the same time, the government gave zoning recommendations to municipalities to prevent the intermixing of inharmonious racial groups. In other words, black and brown folks stay within the red line. Banks don't give them a mortgage. That means, for example, that after World War II, when the GI Bill was giving zero-interest mortgages to all the veterans, in my area alone, just in the Capital District, 67,000 mortgages were given out. Black and brown people got less than 50 of those mortgages. Most of the wealth in this country comes from handing down property, 80% to be precise. Redlining is one of the key reasons why a white child born and taking their first breath today in this country is 16 times wealthier on average than a black child when they take their first breath. Not because they did extra exercises in the womb, right, to earn that wealth, but because, according to the Pew Research Center, in white communities in general, wealth goes down the generations. Your parents help you pay for college, right? Your grandparents help you pay for your music lessons. In black and brown communities, generally, wealth goes up the generations. I pay my mama's medical bills, right? I pay my grandma's funeral expenses. And so we have the results in our communities where we're living in a situation where our zip code is the #1 determiner of our life expectancy, right? Where black and brown people are much more likely to suffer from diabetes, heart disease, kidney failure, and other diet-related illnesses because of that zip code, not because of poor choices. More likely to struggle with hunger, and of course, dilapidated schools and poor air quality and everything else associated with the apartheid situation that we have. It brings us to today where, as I mentioned, 85% of the labor done on the farms in this country is done by Latino, Latine, Latina folks. Yet only about 2% of the farms are managed by that community. Farming is actually the most racially skewed profession. So if you look at Department of Labor stats, it alternates one year to the next, whether being a farm owner or a veterinarian is like the whitest thing to do, right? And then on the flip side, being a farm laborer is almost always the brownest thing to do, right? So you always have to examine, when you have such a stark pattern like that, what type of systemic inequities are going on. It brings us to today, where according to the 2017 census of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, almost all the land is owned by white folks. 98% of the land on this continent. Not because we don't want it, not because we don't know how to farm, but wealth attracts wealth. Right? Wealth concentrates wealth over time. And I read recently that now it's these retirement funds are like buying up on concentrating all the land, TIAA and all that other funds. And to me, it's no surprise that the way that we treat our human siblings, how we treat one another, is going to be mirrored in the way that we treat the living, breathing earth, right? It's no surprise that our agricultural system, while oppressing farm workers, while stealing the land from indigenous people, while starving folks of good food, is also a major driver of climate change, the number one driver of water withdrawals, the number one driver of habitat conversion, of biodiversity loss, right? Dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, soil erosion. Within the first generation of European colonization of the Midwest, 50% of the organic matter in the soil was burned up as carbon dioxide. It's the first spike on the anthropogenic climate change graph in the 1800s. And it's not that we don't know how to do it right. We still have the memory of those seeds. It's like I said, the food system isn't broken, right? It was really designed to concentrate that wealth and power. I'm going to tell you the good news, what we're doing about it, how we're going to win. But first, I want to give you a second to talk to the person next to you and digest all this a little bit. Talk to the person next to you about where were your ancestors in this history and how are your folks connected to these events. I'll give you like 2.5 minutes. Go ahead. All right, you got 1 minute, so switch if you haven't switched. 1 minute. When I say free the people, you say free the land, free the people. When I say free the people, you say free the land, free the people. Free the people. By any means necessary. Someone else knows Malcolm X grassroots. Ashe. So thank you for sharing with each other, and I hope we get time to hang out after and you can tell me some of those stories. But I want to bring us to the truth now that as long as there has been oppression, there has always been stronger, deeper, wider resistance, right? There's always in every generation been those folks who remember to pluck the seeds out of their ancestors' braids, plant them, tend them, and pass them on. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Soulfire Farm and how it connects to the legacy of that seed. Because, you know, many of us who started Soulfire, we were living in those zip codes I was talking about. I got a master's degree. I was like, I'm going to be fine in life, right? And I move into 12202 zip code. There's no grocery store. There's no farmer's market. There's no community garden plot. I don't have a lot of money. I don't got a car. There's no public transportation. And so the only way to get vegetables into the bodies of my newborn and my 2-year-old and myself is to join an overpriced CSA. I got to walk 2.2 miles, put the veggies on top of the baby in the stroller, right? And go back down. That's like the closest vegetables. And it costs as much as my rent to get that food, right? That is ridiculous. So we got together and we're like, if we want to get free, we need to be able to feed ourselves. We need to be able to create a local, independent, food sovereign system. So Soulfire Farm, we're on 80 acres in Mohican territory in upstate New York outside of Albany. We are a co-op of 8 folks living and working together with a mission to end racism and injustice in the food system. And there's 3 basic ways that we do that. Basically, we farm, we educate, and we mobilize. And the first and most important thing is, of course, the farm. And I'm not talking about like a Twitter farm or like an Instagram farm where you just like post pictures of a plant. I'm talking about snow, sleet, hail, sun, mud, like broken high tunnels and heaters, like a farm. And so we raise vegetables, medicinal herbs, fruits, sheep, chickens, ducks, bees, mushrooms, all the things, right? All the wonderful things. And we grow all that with the goal of what we call solidarity sharing. So first and foremost, we're feeding the community who comes to the farm. We've got between 5,000 and 10,000 plates coming out of our kitchen every year because of how many people come to our training programs. And then everything else we have left over, we do solidarity sharing, which means that we're making sure the people in our community who need the food the most are getting it. In our case, it's returning citizens and the families of incarcerated people. So that food's going to the Center of for Law and Justice. It's going to the Victory Bus Project. And it's also refugees and new Americans, large population in Albany, who we distribute food through the Refugee Welcome Center. And it's been so powerful because, you know, we're poor. We didn't have a trust fund. We bought some marginal lands, and all the farmers who had the nice land down in the valley were giving us a lot of side eye. Like, you cannot grow vegetables in Grafton. Y'all just going to fail. We're like, we will show you. So we took our Afro-Indigenous practices. We built that soil up. And this is the vegetables. They're beautiful, right? So we feel very, very proud to be able to nourish our community and also to participate in regenerating the soil, right? But we didn't make that up. Who are these rememberers who knew what it meant to feed the community? Anyone know? Yeah? The Black Panther Party. You know, most of the time, what they were up to was feeding children. 20,000 children every day in Oakland, as an example. They were also up to the business of bringing elders to their appointments, running clinics, running schools, visiting political prisoners, right? Raising bail money for folks. That's mostly what they were up to. And so it wasn't until they established their free breakfast program that the federal government got it together to actually get free breakfast in the public schools, right? So we give thanks for those rememberers. Now, as I mentioned, all this food we grow, we're committed to leaving the land better than we found it, right? That means, as our fellow farm manager Larissa Jacobson would say, our job is to call the carbon back into the soil where it belongs. Mulching, cover cropping, permanent raised beds, no-till, perennial polycultures, all these ancestral traditions we use, and we watch year by year, right, as that topsoil builds up, year by year, as that organic matter increases percent by percent, as the pollinators come back. And we do this with 2 certifications. We have a naturally grown certification, and we have a food justice certified, which is the label y'all should check out, because it shows that you're committed to worker rights on your farm. Living wages, good housing conditions, fair treatment, shared decision making. It's the only label that tells you how people treat their workers, right? And we build all our own buildings too. Adobe, cob, straw bale, solar, timber frame, like literally our buildings made out of the very mud of the earth upon which we stand. 18 species of wood in our community center. And all of it is clustered together to make sure that most of the landscape is left for the wildlife. But we didn't make that up either, right? Who are these rememberers who carry the seed forward? Dr. George Washington Carver, right? This man right here is the father of organic agriculture, United States, Tuskegee University, 1890s to the early 1900s. He had a whole generation of farmers in the time of cotton monocropping and just destruction of the soil. He got a whole generation of farmers to do cover cropping with legumes, composting, right? To be silvopasturing their pigs through the oak forest, which is like supposedly a new discovery, right? All of these things. And they were skeptical. They were like, wait, you want me to not plant my cotton and instead plant some beans and like turn them in to feed the soil? That sounds like a great idea. He's like, no, the Bible wants you to do it. Look, here in Psalms, it says, whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. And God was talking about the earthworms, right? He's literally quoting scripture to get farmers to go organic. This brother over here, Baba Watley, Booker T. Watley, right? Anyone ever hear of farm to table before? Okay. So people thought he was nuts too. In the middle 1900s, all the farmers were trying to get their food out through wholesalers, middlemen, right? But the middlemen aren't paying the black farmers any time of day, giving them low prices or not buying their accounts at all. And he says, let's forget about that. I have a theory. I think that those city folks, they miss the country. They miss the country not enough to come actually work in the country, but they miss the country enough to want to feel part of something. So we're going to offer membership to our farms. And with your membership, you get a wholesale discount. You get access to whatever's ripe every week. You get the opportunity to get a newsletter where you can help name the sheep, right? And you can come to the farm and pick your own vegetables. People also were like, nobody is going to come pay you to do your work. He's like, trust me. Has anyone ever done pick your own apples, strawberries? I do it all the time, even though I farm. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I take my kids and they're like, don't we have apples? I'm like, I know, but it's different. Let's go. Let's go work for this other farmer. But perhaps the most important technology that I think we carry on is the spiritual technology. I've had the great privilege of studying farming and culture in Ghana, West Africa for a significant amount of time. I just got back, actually. And my teachers there are the queen mothers. They're like everything. They're the storytellers, conflict negotiators. They do all the rites of passage. They take care of the orphans. They take care of the environment, right? Queen mothers are everything. But they think we're nuts over here. And one time they brought me into their compound, and they were like, Leah, they actually said, Amidede, because that's my name there. Amidede, is it true that the farmers in the U.S., they put a seed in the ground, and they don't sing or dance or pray or pour libation? They don't even say thank you. And then they, expect the seed to come up? I was like, oh, my God. It's true. That's why you're all sick. Right? You're all sick because you treat the earth like a commodity and not like a relative. So here we are, trying to treat the earth like a relative, doing our ceremonies, keeping our ceremonies alive. Right? The second thing we're up to, which really came from pretty much as soon as we started our farm, we started getting calls. Sister Kathy Dixon from Boston being like, is it really true that there's black people farming in the woods? Can I come? Cause I'm having trouble out here by myself. People calling from California, people calling from Oregon. Can I come? We're we need to figure out how to create some training programs because our folks are encountering a lot of struggles getting into these incubator programs, encountering racism in the WOOF volunteer program, don't want to go far from home and be at a land-grant university and can't afford it anyway, et cetera, et cetera. So we're like, all right, let's start a program. Let's start the Black, Indigenous, People of Color Farming Immersion. I don't know if anyone will come. An hour after we posted on Facebook, which I know is antiquated, it's full. All right, let's start another session. It's full. We get 4 to 6 times as many people applying for these farmer training programs as we have spots. And people will tell you, black folks don't want to farm. What are you talking about? We need the resources. We need culturally relevant training programs, right? We need the land, the capital, to actually start to reclaim that ancestral right to belong. We also have programs that are Spanish first, because it'd be super hypocritical if almost everyone doing the work on the farm speaks Spanish or an indigenous language as their first language and we don't have anything for them. So we have a lot of programs that are Spanish first. And when a pine tree is on the edge of the forest and it's getting a lot of extra sunlight, and making a lot of extra sugar. It does not grow 6 times taller than the other pine trees, right? What it does is it takes those extra sugars and minerals and messages of caring and puts them down through its roots into a mycelial network to share with not just other pine trees, but beech trees, maple trees, birch trees, and even ferns in the forest, right? So when we think about, people are like, well, if you got like 6 times as many applications, you should just franchise and get really big. We're like, we are not KFC. We are a farm. Our success looks like the forest ecosystem getting stronger, which is why what we celebrate the most is when Sister Keisha Cameron graduates from our program and starts a sibling program outside of Atlanta, Georgia for Black farmers who want to get into fiber, right? It's why we celebrate when Ireri and Viviana start Caratumbo Farming Co-op, where immigrants own together their own CSA, right? It's why we celebrate when Rosa Rivera and Ray Frazier create a community center with new Black-owned community gardens in Schenectady and so forth, because it's about the forest ecosystem. And it's about the babies, too. This is our youth program, Liberation on Land, LOL. They made that up. I will tell you, the first year we started this camp, we thought it was going to be like a rites of passage. And after a rites of passage, you are done, right? You like go to the sacred grove and you get your name or whatever, and then you're done. But then they all came back. This is the 4th year, y'all. It's the 4th year because they love the land and they love each other and they want to keep growing. These are their ancestor staff, so that anytime they don't know which way to go, they know how to call their ancestors and figure out the right direction for what's next. So as was mentioned, I was not an English teacher, I'm a biology teacher, super duper science nerd. Like my favorite class to teach is on cation exchange capacity because I just love the nutrient holding negatively charged clay ions and how they grab that magnesium, and I just think of metaphors. I love it. But here's the thing, I finish the program, I get my evaluations, and nobody mentions my soil chemistry class. They're all talking about, now I feel empowered to leave this abusive marriage, and like now I feel like I can put down my addictions, and now I'm going to leave this dead-end job. And I'm like, what is that? It's a farming class. It's a farming class. But here's the thing, y'all. As my brother Chris Bolden Newsom would say, the land was the scene of the crime, right? The land was the scene of the crime. We came with all kinds of trauma from that sharecropping and that slavery and all that stuff. But she was never the criminal. She was always the source of our strength. And when we ran away from those red clays of Georgia to the paved streets of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Boston, we left something behind. And that's a little piece of our souls. And the earth has been crying and yearning to feel our footsteps again. And as soon as we come back and touch her, she's got a whole lot to say. And that's why when people come to a farming class, there's a whole bunch of other healing that goes on. The grant makers don't know how to measure hope yet, but I will tell you that that is our most powerful harvest. But we didn't make that up either. Who are these rememberers whose seeds we carry forward? Anyone know anybody? Any of these people? Fannie Lou Hamer. We already talked a little bit about her fixing the scales. Mama Fannie Lou Hamer, one of my favorite quotes of hers, she said, if you have 400 quarts of greens and gumbo soup canned for the winter, nobody can push you around or tell you what to say or do, right? By contrast, if you have nothing canned for the winter, as soon as they put the chains around the grocery store, she said, you're going to put down your ballot, you're going to put down your NAACP membership card, and you will go crawling in your knees through the dust trying to get food for your children. So if we can't feed ourselves, what's the civil rights movement really for? So she didn't just talk. She actually started the Freedom Farm Co-op, where she provided ownership and membership for sharecroppers who'd been kicked off their land for the audacity of registering to vote. And they raised vegetables and livestock and provided for each other's scholarships and burial fees, right? Around the same time, Mama Shirley Sherrod and Charles Sherrod, together with 500 other Black families, started the first ever community land trust in Albany, Georgia. They had 5,700 acres together. And land trusts, for those who don't know, are a powerful neo-indigenous, I will say, land ownership model where there actually isn't ownership, there's collective stewardship. And the reason they wanted to create that is because they went around the world and studied our old ways of holding land together. And they said, this idea of private land ownership doesn't fit our culture. What can we do differently? and came up with the land trust, right? Now there are hundreds, if not thousands, right? Came up with co-ops. The third and final thing we're up to is movement building. And this came from one of my elders, Baba Halfkenny, who was a civil rights veteran, survived all prison and, assaults and all that for his participation. And he was like, your farm is cute. You got carrots and like kids with sticks pounding on the ground. I think it's nice. But do you know what actual black farmers did during the actual civil rights movement? I said that I didn't. He said they were the backbone of the movement. There would literally be no civil rights movement without the black farmer. It's not like the freedom riders could rent out the Sheraton for their symposium, right, to discuss. It's not like you could stop in a coffee shop and plan your next protest. So the black farmers was the only place you could go. They put up the housing, the meeting space, the meals, the fix your shoes. They leveraged their land as collateral to pay your bail money to get you out of jail when you got arrested. And they watched out for the night riders and would fell a tree in the road just in time to slow them down so you could get away with your life. Quite literally, there'd be no civil rights movement without black farmers. And so Baba Halfkenny was like, so what's you going to do next, right? So we try to get more involved with how can we leverage this farm and this community towards systemic change. Part of that systemic change is reparations, which I know for some people is a 4-letter word. It's really a simple concept, right? Imagine your neighbor came over and stole your cow in broad daylight and everybody saw it. 2 weeks later, the neighbor comes over to your door, tears in their eyes, being like, I'm so sorry I stole your cow. I really feel bad about it, but I'm going to make it up to you, right? Every week for the rest of the cow's life, I'm going to give you half a pound of butter. What would you say? I would like my cow back. It's kind of obvious, you took my cow back. But this is our society is all about the butter. How about we just give you a couple little scholarships over here, a little reservation over here, and, we'll apologize and cry, and then that'll make it okay. But the land, 98% of the land is taken. $10 trillion of wealth is taken, right? And we haven't gotten over that. There's still a wealth gap. There's still a lands gap. There's still a labor gap. And so we're not letting the government off the hook. But in the meantime, we're encouraging people-to-people reparations. That means if you got something that really ain't yours, give some of it back. That's it. And people put projects on the map. You can find them. You can give them land. Give them the 40 acres and a mule or a hug or, whatever you got. Some time, free meeting space, fiscal sponsorship, right? So we've had a lot of matches. People who were into the reparations map said, we need to create an organization for this because a lot of folks want to give land. But in order to give land and make sure that it doesn't get lost again, we need to hold it in trust. So we started the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, which is an Indigenous and Black collaboration with deep Indigenous consultation of all of the 12 tribal nations in the Northeast. And the idea is that people give land to the trust puts the conservation easements on it, the cultural easements on it, the ag easements, and then shares it back to the community with a right of first refusal to the original people. Right, and so we're in the startup phase of that. We should have some first land transfers by December of this year, which is very exciting. I don't know what happened to my picture, but storytelling is the way that stuff gets done. And I didn't used to believe it. I was like, I need to get back to my greenhouse because that's the real work. But I swear to you, after every single time that I or any one of the 30 people who are involved in our griot collective go and tell a story, someone's going to get a farm out of that. Or someone is going to realize that they want to be a farmer and come to a program. And so we use the power of story to catalyze action. And this exists beyond the borders of the so-called United States. The people closest to the earth are who know the taste, smell, touch of solution. It's the peasant farmers of the world. And I personally believe that through intercambio or exchange of ideas and knowledge and resources, that is how we're going to come up with solutions toward global food sovereignty. So we have sibling farms in Haiti, in Vieques, in Ghana, in Mexico. And most recently, last time we were in Haiti, we were installing irrigation systems because the hurricanes had wiped out the crop. People needed to plant a second crop during the dry season. And it's so powerful to see. I mean, they literally needed like $600 to buy this pump. So we raised it. We got the $600. By the next day, 27 farms are irrigated because everyone has that power of kombit, right? That collective labor, where they know by the time that pump gets here, we're already going to have dug the ditches to everybody's farm, and we all coming out, and someone's already cooking, and someone's already got the brass band going, and then the farms and everyone's planting by the next day, right? We can't figure out what to do about this virus, never mind how to, take care of ourselves and feed ourselves. And the last thing we're up to in the area of organizing, which might be a snore to many of you, is policy. And my friend Lindsay Lunsford at Tuskegee University put it so well. She's like, you might not want to do policy, but if you don't do it, their pens will write you out of existence. The Farm Bill, the largest piece of legislation we have in terms of the amount of money that it moves, controls the whole food system. So we rabble-rouse to get little things changed at a time. Like before the last Farm Bill, if your granddaddy didn't leave a will and you owned your farm with all your cousins, you couldn't qualify for any federal programs. Now you can. Small but important thing that we organize for, right? Making sure the Green New Deal actually represents Black and brown communities, right? Making sure that Sanders' platform for equity includes Black and brown farmers and land workers. But we didn't make that up either. Who are these rememberers? Chavez, Huerta, Larry Eatsleong, the Immokalee workers, right? We have a lot, we owe a lot of credits to the farm worker movement for teaching us how to organize to change policy. I mean, these are folks who've just been under the thumb of this empire and have figured out how to bring like the grape industry to its knees through boycott, right? Figured out how to bring Wendy's and Taco Bell to their knees through boycott and really start to change some things, mostly at the state level. Folks like the Haitian peasant movement, who if you want to learn how to resist Monsanto, you check them out. Because Monsanto has this insidious little habit of giving benevolent donations of genetically modified seed after a natural disaster, just long enough, along with the chemicals to grow them, just long enough so that your native seed stock is depleted. And then they'll sell it to you, for just $9.99 a month after that. The Haitian peasant movement saw right through it and burned that seed at the port, burned it down. They won the Global Food Sovereignty Prize. So now the seed is handed to y'all, right? You all said you eat. You all said that you live on lands, which means that all of us are complicit and responsible. And if you're not already doing it, I challenge you to think if you can give 10 hours a year to the movement, either in your time or the equivalent of your salary, just 10 hours a year to make the movement fair and just. And as my daughter Nishima would say, the food system is everything it takes to get sunshine onto your plate, right? So there's a lot of different points of intersection. There's a lot of different right answers, but all the right answers have something in common. And that thing is to make sure that the people most impacted by the issue are the people in leadership about how to solve the issue, right? If I want to deal with anti-Semitism in the community, who's the experts who I should be listening to? The Jewish community, right? This is obvious, experiencing it, right? If I want to deal with or support the nurses who right now are really struggling because they don't have the right training or protective equipment to deal with this outbreak, I want to get involved with that. Who should I listen to about what needs to be done? The nurses. Not a trick question. If I want to deal with racism in farming, who's the experts? Black and brown farmers, indigenous farmers, right? And so it's really as simple as, how do I give my time, my money, my lands, my platform, my C3 status, whatever I got, to these Black and brown-led projects, right? On their terms, not on my terms. And there are so many shout-outs that could be given, including Baba Malik, Mama Karen, Baba Dennis, right? Mama Gail, Katrina Baxter. There are hundreds of organizations led by the people most impacted. Many of them don't even have a staff or a website, they're so underfunded, that could use support. And we took some time on our website, soulfirefarm.org, to list and compile these organizations, which are many more than you see here, if you want to check it out. And let me know if you know others, because we're always adding to it and trying to encourage people to support the front lines. So I am going to conclude by reading you one of my all-time favorite passages, which is even more special and sacred because its author recently joined the realm of the ancestors. It says, See what you can do. Never mind you can't tell one letter from another. Never mind you born a slave. Never mind you lose your name. Never mind your daddy dead. Never mind nothing. This here is what a person can do if they put their mind to it and their back in it. Stop sniveling, the land said. Stop picking around the edges of the world. Take advantage, and if you can't take advantage, take disadvantage. We live here on this planet, in this nation, in this country, right here, nowhere else. We got a home in this rock, don't you see? Nobody starving in my home, nobody crying in my home, and if I got a home, you got one too. Grab it, grab this land. Take it, hold it, my brothers, make it, my sisters, shake it, my siblings, squeeze it, turn it, twist it, beat it, kick it, kiss it, whip it, stomp it, dig it, plow it, seed it, reap it, rent it, buy it, sell it, own it, build it, multiply it, and pass it on. Can you hear me? Pass it on. Ashe. Thank you. I think we have 13 minutes for questions, so if anyone has questions. Yeah. Is it working now? Yes, different one.
My name is Nestor. Thank you for your speech. I mean, your lecture was great. I have a question. So, how has the food justice movement affected the criteria for like restaurant ratings? Like, does the James Beard Award, like, do they look at sustainability practices or anything like that, or Michelin star review?
I shouldn't be so skeptical. I should say I don't really know. But in my experience, the farthest that we've gotten in terms of consumer culture really stops at like the greening of the food. I haven't seen any label or any big publicity around farm worker rights. Even front of house, back of house stuff is largely invisibilized. I think there's a long way to go in that.
My name's Emma. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about where you currently get your seeds and where you would want to get your seeds.
Yeah. Well, we do save a bunch of our own seed, and we actually share some of that seed through the True Love seed catalog. True Love is all one word, which is a co-op of like food justice oriented farms. That's really dope. In addition to that, we buy seed from another Black-owned co-op called Southern Exposure, and then if anything else we can't get because we're in the north, like Fedco. I'm happy with those co-ops. I do wish that the dream of one of my elders, Mama Ira Wallace, who owns Southern Exposure seed, is that we as a community would do more to save our ancestral varieties and have a robust seed keeping and sharing network. And she prays that that's her legacy before she leaves this earth. And so my aspiration and my hope would that be all of us that see ourselves as growers and also as keepers of seed and story.
We have a question from a Michigan State viewer. Her name is Lindsay Mish. Her question is, what are some of the most important differences between food sovereignty and other movements fighting to revitalize land and the environment, like veganism?
Interesting. So, I mean, I think taking a step back and looking at really the definition of a movement is important. Without being overly academic, I would say for me a criteria for a movement is that it is led by and centers the people most impacted. So I actually don't personally categorize diet trends as movements. I'm not saying they're not important, but the whole voting with your dollar or like consumer preferences as activism, I think, is really limited in its impact. And that with movements, they've been successful through litigation, policy change, direct action, and alternative institution creation. And I think that's really where the emphasis needs to be. Folks can feel free to eat how they want to eat. I am very concerned right now about the impact of vegan activism on indigenous food and land sovereignty. There's a lot of villainizing of people's ancestral foodways, which actually are the most sustainable foodways, like eating salmon and buffalo and like grazed ruminants on the open prairie is the original food system. And so I think some nuance in our conversation, mind you, I don't eat from CAFOs, I get all of that, but I think there is a lot more room to understand nuance and regional variation and cultural variation in diet as a way of moving forward to a sustainable food system.
Matt? Hi. Hello, my name is Kello, farmer from Detroit. My question for you is, what does your farm do during the winter to sustain your farm workers, monetarily wise?
Yeah, word. Yeah, seasonal, the seasonality of farm work in the north can be a real deep issue. And so there's a lot of right answers to how to solve that and a lot of wrong ones. Our staff is all full-time year-round, and we just have seasonal emphasis. So from, you know, the middle of March until the middle of November, it's very much like farming and hosting training programs. And then everyone takes their vacations for part of the winter, but the rest of the time, that's when we do all of our organizing work, come to Detroit and talk about farming, uprooting racism trainings, writing articles. And so people have kind of like a dual life, which I like that flow. Because by the end of the farming season, I'm like, why am I a farmer? And then I'm excited by the next spring. So it's good.
Awesome. Thank you. My name's Alan. I'm a student here, and I was just curious. You were talking about regenerative farming, some of your practices that you have in your farm, and you mentioned really briefly that tilling was one of the practices that was unsustainable and even damaging to the soil. Is that just because of it just being really disruptive, or I was just wondering what alternatives are there for more sustainable practices?
Definitely. And again, like, I just love me a farmer, so I'm not, if you till your farm, I get it. We tilled our farm for a few years too until we found a different way. But kind of imagine like this is our house right now, and if someone took it, flipped it upside down and shook it, like how that experience would be for you. So that's what it's like for all these soil biota, is that your house is literally being like torn up and trashed and blown around, and then you're trying to recover and rebuild for the whole season. And it takes that long in order to rebuild that soil structure. Also, tillage, because it oxidizes, puts all this oxygen into the soil, it increases the rate of decomposition, and then all of this organic matter that was stable burns up as CO2 and causes climate change. So alternatives to tillage on our scale, which is still relatively small, you know, like a few acres, we can do occultation, which is a fancy word for putting down really big tarps that block out the sunlight, so when weeds germinate, they die back, and then the earthworms kind of do the tillage for us. On bigger farms, they usually are doing cover crops with like roller crimper and then planting right into them. But there's a lot of, Rodale Institute has some good literature on it if you want to read more. We have time for like maybe 2 more questions. Anyone has?
Hi, my name is Catherine, and I'm a faculty member here, and I'm also a farmer. And I loved your enthusiasm for farming, and I'm very impressed with all the things you're doing. And I'm not suggesting that you have more to put anything more on your plate, but I'm wondering. I'm sure you've thought about how might you scale up the wonderful grassroots efforts that you've started and that you've connected with to more substantially transform the food system, because we know that. You know, we all have a long way to go to take all these wonderful grassroots movements and transform it at a larger scale.
It's a really good question, and I mentioned kind of metaphorically this idea of like mycelial growth and creating these hubs. I think we still have a lot of base building to do to have the political power to make the changes we need to make. And so, I mean, I think even as we're seeing right now in the current epidemic scare, we need our local food systems to be strong. And so our focus is on getting those farmers to be able to produce food for their communities and have mutual aid and support. And then for like the scale up, what we do is we're ears to the ground. So we have thousands of alumni in our network. We listen to what they need, and then we're translating that to Heal Food Alliance, the National Young Farmers Coalition, these lobbying groups who are then pushing for policy so that hopefully, like Costa Rica, they actually pay farmers a monthly wage to sequester carbon and protect pollinators and infiltrate water. Like, imagine what that would do for the farm economy if you could count on a certain amount of income just for your sustainable practices. So we're kind of like the grassroots and also the policy. Yeah.
Hi, Leah. What's your take on seasonal eating?
I feel like you have a thought about seasonal eating that you want to share.
Just like, how do we talk about it, or how do we engage with that? Because it's not really that way anymore.
So seasonal eating is the idea of like eating what's locally available in the season where you are. So like right now it would be a whole lot of freaking root vegetables, like turnips, and like, it's complicated. I think where it gets complicated is that anytime you try to do a one-size-fits-all diet, you're very quickly doing like colonial imperialism. And so we are a diverse community. We have cultural foodways and we have cultural ingredients. And there's a certain amount of local substitution you can do. Like a sumac berry can sort of taste like a lemon if you get it just right in your ingredient, but not really. And like there's nothing that replaces a plantain and like a, that type of thing. And so I personally am very excited about some of the trade routes we have going between like Southern and Caribbean Black farmers and Northern Black communities, using biodiesel, all like doing the best we can, but making sure that we're actually supporting local farmers, even if they're not within our stone's throw. And I eat, 70% seasonal, so it's complicated. Like maybe one more, if there's like one more. What?
Stop at Argos if you live in Ann Arbor.
Why? Okay, cool. I think we can squeeze in one more. I can talk fast. Yeah. Right here. The question.
Hi, Leah.
Hi.
Stavros, also more of a food systems worker in Detroit. Thank you to all the wonderful Detroit Black farmers that are here today. You guys have been holding it down for a really long time, so props. I guess a little bit on that. As we've seen, especially the last few decades, the proportion of farms that are your size, you said 80 acres, so like 10 to 150 acres has drastically declined, that like mid-grade size family farm. And so a lot of the conversations that I have with people who are skeptical of local food or skeptical of slow local food is, oh, well, we can't feed the world without industrial agriculture. And I'm like, well, no, the world feeds itself on indigenous and local food. So like, I'm curious as to what you say to these people, because then it's like, oh, well, there's research and this and that. And I'm just like, how do you frame that conversation?
I mean, I just throw mad facts at them. I'm like, still 70% of the world's food is grown by smallholders. And then if you actually, it's depending how you measure yield too, because there's some really powerful studies that show the milpa, for example, the three sisters, like indigenous gardens, right? Corn, beans, and squash together. You're gonna get 40% more productivity, calories, right, per acre than you would if you grew each thing alone, right? Because of the way that the synergy between the different heights and And so it's just not factual. It's not actually factually true. That you need that scale of agriculture to feed the world. It's actually less productive per acre. The thing that it's more efficient in terms of profit, which is why the USDA policy has been get bigger, get out since like the early 80s. So, anyway, on that happy note, y'all, free the people, free the land, keep it real.
Before everyone leaves, could you guys get out your clicker for one last attendance point? And just press A if you enjoyed Leah's talk. Thank you.